as a salesperson, you're going to be selling internally just as much as you're going to be selling externally. So you need to put as much emphasis on your internal relationships and your internal communication as you do your external communication. If you work in B2B sales, chances are you're part of a team. So you work with other people, you're going to have to rely on those people. And it's really important that you have strong relationships with them, because what's going to happen is you're going to have to at some point go out of process to win a piece of business. And you want those people that are going to have to approve you going out of process to want to do that for you.
This is Outside Sales Talk, the best podcast for outside salespeople. I'm your host, Steve Benson, and we're here to chat with the world's top sales experts so that you can get their best sales tactics to level up your game. Welcome back to Outside Sales Talk. Today, I've got Andrew Barbuto with us, and he's going to teach us about becoming a top sales producer. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So by way of introduction, Andrew is a top-performing adtech sales professional with a passion for helping customers. Over the past 8 years, he's sold $250 million in services and software, becoming the top-grossing rep at 2 digital media companies. Andrew's first sales book, Top Sales Producer: How to Crush Your B2B Sales Quota, is releasing in November 2024. He'll be sharing his proven 10-step sales method designed to help new salespeople ramp up quickly and experienced reps close more profitable deals faster. And today, we're going to be covering some of those topics that he covers in the book. So, Andrew, let's jump into it, man. How did you get started in sales?
So, my path probably somewhat similar to the average person that gets into sales. I mean, I was in college, just like most people. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to graduate college. That was the big thing. But unfortunately, you can only hang on for so long. So, while I was in college, I got an internship. I was basically trying to go as broad as possible, so that way I could keep my options open. And one of the companies that did a lot of recruiting on campus was Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And it was like a good management trainee program where you pick people up, you're selling the insurance. They're very much customer service oriented. And I did that, and I did it for a summer leading into my senior year. And it was great experience. I was the top salesperson in Long Island for the interns. The only issue was those pesky nightmares that I was having, where I was doing my sales script in my sleep because I was so stressed out having to sell every day. So I was looking for something to be a little bit longer term and not like on a daily basis. So I basically was going to decide to go back to school, just frankly to extend my college experience as long as possible. I enrolled in a program in Albany, which is where I went to school, and I needed an internship prior to my entering into the program. And I got a sales internship at a company called Zaxxas, which is a digital media company. And I essentially just shadowed the team, and I got to see what B2B sales was all about. And that's when it was kind of like an aha moment, like kind of took the best of both worlds of what I enjoyed about sales, the customers, facing interaction with customers, the fact that you work hard, the harder you work, the better you're going to do. And at the same time, I didn't have to worry about selling every single day. And so, once that internship was over, I decided, okay, this makes sense. I'm ready to go. But unfortunately, my manager was like, oh, it's not quite how it works. You can't just go from being an intern to a sales rep. You have to start at the bottom. So that's exactly what I did. I started as an associate, learning the ropes, and then worked my way to an account manager, and then ultimately made my way back onto the sales team a couple years later. And the rest was history.
Started from the bottom, now we're here. So, and you've sold digital media services and software in your career.
Yep.
What would you say what did you learn from selling those different things? What were the biggest differences that you saw in selling the different products? I learned so much earlier in my career about what direction I wanted to go in, from selling. I was at IBM and I was selling software and consulting and hardware, because IBM in those days kind of had their fingers in everything. I guess they still do for the most
Big
part.
brother.
And yeah, so they, and I really learned, how much I liked selling software as opposed to say consulting services, um,
Hmm.
because it's so much easier and consulting's a harder business, basically. But tell me about what you learned from selling different things.
Yeah. So when I started out my career, I exclusively sold digital media services, and so it is probably somewhat similar to the consulting business that you're in because there's a level of us doing service on behalf of customers. They are relying on us to do everything for them, and it's a very short term focus, right? So we did a campaign by campaign basis, and I got really good at that. I think that the biggest difference between selling services and selling software is selling services is really just about basically convincing somebody that you are able to take care of them. You give them full white glove service. You're going to be there. You're going to deliver on what you say you are. You're going to be quick to respond, provide great customer service. They can rely on you. It's really less of a business conversation than software, right? Software is significantly different. So my first job, like I said, I just sold services. But in my industry, the technology that we were using to execute campaigns on behalf of our clients was increasingly being brought in house by the people we were selling to. So advertising agencies and marketers. And so that's really where the wind was blowing. And so that trend has continued, and so I wanted to position myself somewhere where I could sell the software to the clients that I was working with previously. But the difference between selling service and software, like I said, very different. So it's kind of like night and day in a certain respect in my industry because when you're selling software, there's significantly more change management involved. Typically, there's more decision makers. It's a long term conversation, and what's most different about it is that it switched from more of like a tactical conversation to a business conversation. So rather than hey, let me make your life as easy as possible, it switched to hey, let me make your business as profitable as possible. And then there's a whole other suite of training, onboarding that's separate from services, right? Because with services, we're doing everything on their behalf. So there was a lot. It was a pretty big learning curve, and I think that that's probably something that a lot of people can relate to when you do make that switch over, or really selling anything differently. Selling really isn't selling. You have to really understand. These days, you have to be a domain expert. So you have to really thoroughly understand. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about being an associate, that was one of the best things for my career because I got to, although it was the true grunt work, doing the behind the scenes stuff that nobody else wanted to do, it gave me the experience to look under the hood and really learn the ropes. So that way, when I did get into a position to talk to clients about what I was using, I could speak from my experience and not just speak from, a high level.
So important to have that expertise in what you're selling and actually understand the use case and actually understand what the customers need. It's funny how many people in sales aren't actually able to be do consultative sales because they're actually not experts in their
Right.
area, and that's really step one, I'd say, to becoming a top sales producer is you've got to be able to add that value and be a true expert. And like you
Definitely.
say, I mean, you were when you were an associate, learning the blocking and tackling, so valuable to like get the dirt under your fingernails and learn how
And
how
that's
to be
why
able
it
to
is the first
do
step in my
everything
book.
really. Yeah.
That is how my book. So my book starts out with that, um,
Mm.
which is your first step is to become an expert before anything else, right? That's so important, right, Stephen? Because exactly what you just mentioned. You can't sell something if you don't truly understand what you're selling. Uh, Back in the day, I recall a salesperson that switched over. He previously was selling like insurance, and I'm sure he was great at selling that. But then when he moved into the digital media world, it's a completely different ballgame. The sales cycle is nothing like it. And so, you really need to understand what you're selling when you're doing consultative sales. And that's even more important in the software business.
Absolutely. And tell me about prospecting strategy. How do you coach people, or when you teach people to become a top sales producer like you? What do you how do you discuss prospecting?
Yeah, so I think that, and this has been a really like awesome experience for me with the whole writing of the book thing. Basically, where it started out was me just wanting to consolidate all of my learnings from the last 8 years of sales, just in case I ever, got zapped from the Men in Black thing and I lost all my memory. I just wanted to put everything down in paper and just kind of consolidate it. And so, what this has allowed me to do is really flush out the processes that I've been using. And the biggest thing when it comes to prospecting that I've come to understand is it's really more about the who you're targeting, right? That's probably more than 50% of the battle is finding the right people, because you know depending on what industry you're in, you may be selling a niche product, right? In my industry, we're pretty commoditized, and so it's really important that we're targeting the right people. So spending more time upfront to find those right people is more than half the battle. And exactly how you approach it is probably the other 50%. But if you're not targeting the right people, that could be very detrimental, because that's where everything starts. I look at it like it's a house, and the prospect research is the foundation of the house. If it's not on strong foundation, then the rest of it's just not going to work. And so how I define qualified is twofold: is someone needs to have the means to buy from you. So they need to have the funds, and they need to have the funds available in the short term, as opposed to, hey, we've got $5 billion, but it's locked up into long-term contracts. That does nothing for you. Um, and then they need to have a need, right? So that's what's so critical, is do they have a need? It's not about who you want to work with, right? It's about who you can help. So spending more time in that research phase, treating it like, in a very as important as the outreach, is something that I think has had a big impact in my prospecting efforts. And then from there, it's about just targeting people on multiple channels, being persistent, following up. Takes about 7 touch points to actually get a response from a cold prospect. But the research is also important for turning cold prospects into potentially warm leads. So, what I mean by that is, in your research, aside from just finding out who you're going to be targeting, from a company standpoint, is also finding out where you can get to actually become more of a, like, warm up that prospect. So, I use LinkedIn Sales Navigator all the time. It's a fantastic tool because what it allows you to do is say, okay, all the people that went to my alma mater, all the people that maybe that worked at my company in the past, or worked at one of my customers' companies and moved on. All of that is right there for you. And then also, if you have mutual connections with them, that's another great use case, because you can message the person who is on your team that maybe knows them and see if you can get an introduction. So that's another big piece of research, which I think is sometimes a little bit undervalued.
Absolutely, leveraging those relationships, or finding relationships that you could make because you have that overlap. Are there any other tools that you find to be super useful other than LinkedIn as you're doing research and figuring out the multiple channels that you're using to interact with your prospects?
Yeah, so I use I three main channels, right, from an actual communication standpoint: the email, of course, LinkedIn, and the phone. Uh, and I think that what's important is the strategy that you're using with how you sequence your messages. So, I feel like a lot of times salespeople will send one or two emails and they'll give up. But they, the reality is that not everybody answers on every single channel. So maybe this is somebody who never is using LinkedIn or is never really on it, or someone that is, has a million emails in their inbox. And so they have to dig through their email, or maybe somebody who never answers the phone. The way to ensure that you're going to have the best chance of actually getting noticed is by using multiple channels and sequencing them. So starting with LinkedIn, following up with an email. If they don't get a response after a few days, maybe give them a call.
Yeah, it's so important to catch people where they are, right? Like someone that I actually did want to interact with was they just friended me on LinkedIn. They hadn't even reached out yet, but I knew who they were and wanted to interact with them. I pinged them right back, and I was like, "Oh, hey, we gotta chat about this." Then then once I talked to them, I figured out they'd been chasing me on Instagram for months, but I never open Instagram. Like,
There you go.
my I, I just open it and find out that I got tagged in a bunch of things I can't see anymore. But but like, but to them, they're 15 years younger or something. They're like, you never go on Instagram? I'm like, no, I go on LinkedIn every day. Like,
Right, right,
so it's cultural. It's what country you're in. It's your age. All these different things of, like, where to catch people, right? Like,
right. Hmm.
the phone versus email versus et cetera, et cetera, right? So it's really, I think, the multiple channel strategy, but also adjusting it. You can often make a guess about where you're going to actually catch somebody, but certainly don't get discouraged with 2 emails. I mean,
Right.
that's some people. I mean, I've seen people that have 30,000 emails in their
Yeah.
inbox, and I'm like, how do you live? I mean, I would like
I
that's
don't ever expect, this is something I learned very early on. I don't ever expect a response from my first email or even my second email. Not just
yeah,
not just with prospects, with clients too, honestly. And that was a little surprising for me. But the reality is that people are busy, and it's not personal, right? If they're not responding
yeah,
to you, it's just because they're busy, just like everyone. Like, we're all busy, right? And I think that what it
yeah.
comes down to is how far are you on their priority list?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've emailed friends and that I know want to talk to me about a certain thing, or and they just won't get back to me, and I'll forget about it. And be like, oh, a week later, I'm like, I was supposed to talk to him about this. You text them, they get right back to you, like, oh, well, my email, and then you realize, oh, this guy never deals with emails. So, like, it just kind of depends, right? So
Mhm.
I think that's great advice, and important to kind of come from a place of empathy. Of everyone's got 17 places they're getting messages, and some of them they may never open, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah. And if you look at it like, okay, like, don't, one way to look at it is I have not sent an email unless I've sent seven of them. Right. So, like, I, just because I hit them, reach out to somebody one time, you also have to vary the timing that you send the emails. So some people are early risers and they maybe start work at 8 a.m. Some people work late and they may be more, more susceptible to read your email and respond later versus earlier. You got to mix it up. Also, the channels they use can also vary by time. So, for example, I I just look at my own habits, but this also translates to my prospecting efforts, which is email. From my experience, is usually better in the mornings. Like, first thing in the morning, you want to be the first in their inbox. Whereas LinkedIn Sales Navigator uh, is more of an evening thing. People maybe midday lunch, maybe like the day is rounding down, they're checking out their LinkedIn, and they be more likely to respond at that point versus something that is a first thing in the morning where they're trying to get all their most important priorities done.
yeah, makes sense. Um, let's talk about what are some things that you do in a new business meeting, new customer prospect, to make sure that it's a productive interaction and that you're moving the ball downfield and that there are solid next steps coming out of the interaction.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that this is something that does come with some experience. So, with newer sales, and for myself, when I first started, this was something that it's a learning curve in terms of actually getting next steps in a meeting, and not just like, oh, the meeting went really great, I'm going to send over follow-ups, and then you don't hear back. So I would just say that, one quick point is, especially with software. That was a big adjustment for me. Where, with services, it's like, if the conversation goes well, I'm looking to submit a proposal afterwards, right? Whereas with software, I'm not looking to immediately submit a proposal. I just need to get to a demo stage, right? So shooting for that demo stage as opposed to trying to jump ahead was something that was a learning curve for me. Uh, Generally speaking, though, when it comes to how I ensure I have productive meetings that lead to next steps, is especially in a first meeting, do a lot of research. But then when you get into the meeting, ask questions and let your prospect talk. Right, let them do the majority of the talking. Like, I want my prospect to do 70% of the talking in the beginning, in an initial sales meeting. I want to be there listening diligently, so that way I can understand how I can help. Right. But one thing that I do even before I really get into those questions is, first I want to qualify myself as somebody who's credible. And that's where the meeting research, pre meeting planning comes in so importantly. Because if I go into a meeting with somebody and I just jump in with questions, then they're going to be like, well, didn't you reach out with some ideas to help? Like, what were you talking about? Clearly, it was just like a sales prospecting thing. But if I go in and say, hey, listen, I checked out your site, I did some research, I noticed that we actually worked together 3 years ago, I saw that you're a full service provider. And so I have some ideas I want to share. But before I do, there's a couple different ways that you can work with us. I just want to make sure that our conversation is as productive as possible. And so, what, uh, because there's a couple different ways to work with us, I want to just ask a couple clarifying questions that I wasn't able to find out from my research before talking about the specifics about how I feel we can help you. And then, and this is important. So I started my agenda. I go, uh, if everything we talk about today seems like it would be helpful, typically we'll set up a follow-up demo, so that way you can see what we've been discussing. Does that sound good? Does that work? And then
Definitely,
get their
yeah.
confirmation. Get that
Hmm.
confirmation so that way later you can reference it once you demonstrated personalized value.
Excellent. And how do you go about maintaining momentum in a sales cycle? How do you maintain momentum, minimize the length of a sales cycle, and keep a sales cycle from getting stalled, which is everyone's least favorite?
And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is when deals get stale, when they get stalled, most of the time it's because you're not talking to the right people. So you're not talking to somebody with an immediate need or with somebody who's got the means, perhaps. And now, granted, like you know, that's not to say that people that are qualified, if you they're going to have an immediate need. But the reality is, if you're talking to enough qualified prospects, somebody in the short term will be ready to buy. What you do until that happens is you provide value. So just because there's no monetary exchange doesn't mean that I can't still help you and be a resource to you. So what I'll do is, it's all situational, of course. But let's say I have a really good conversation with somebody. They've expressed that this would be a helpful solution for them. Uh, I will try to get that next step on my initial meeting. Before it ends, I'll try to get it on the calendar. If I'm not able to, for whatever reason, I'll ask, okay, well, when makes sense then? Like, what's your timeline look like? It's important that you understand what their buying process is like. Is it a short term thing or is it a long term thing? So that you can temper your expectations. And regardless of whether it's a short term or a long term, I always focus in between meetings by trying to provide personalized value. So that way I'm continuing to help them, regardless of whether they're a customer now or will be in the future. I think that's something that is really important because when there is an opportunity, they will remember that you are the person that was continuing to provide them with that value. So that way, you're top of mind and they choose to work with you.
And to zoom back, what do you see as the key factors that really separate top salespeople from average salespeople? What do you, if you were to point your finger to a handful of things, what do you think has made you a top sales producer in these in a relatively commoditized space, right? Ad tech,
Hmm.
where it's difficult to differentiate yourself and beat out competitors, and it's not certainly a high dollar value, highly competitive space. how
Very
how
competitive.
can how can a salesperson win, and how can they be the best on the team?
So I would boil it down to one thing. Obviously, there's a lot of factors we've already spoken about, several of them. Doing your research before you go in a meeting, make sure that you're going in prepared, being flexible, doing more listening, less talking. Uh, of course, hard work's always going to be a major factor. That's still probably the most important thing when it comes to sales because it is so difficult, especially in a commoditized space. But generally speaking, it's very difficult to get people to do what you want them to do. So you have to work hard to make sure you can do that. But the one thing I would boil it down to is time management. And the reason why I say that is because, I mean, we only get so much time in the year, in a day. And how you spend your time will have a massive impact on your ability to achieve quota and to bring in a significant amount of revenue. And so I think that there is a big difference in how top salespeople spend their time than the average ones. And so, just to give you a few examples, like I want to spend the majority of my day speaking with clients and prospects. I want to minimize internal meetings as much as possible. I want to minimize any sort of internal work that is can be, if I can delay it, I will. I want to be spending all my time doing prospecting. I want to make sure that I carve out time every week, every other day to do prospecting. That needs to be a priority. It's not something that you could just be like, oh, I'll deal with more time sensitive client work. So making sure that you're spending an adequate amount of time on that new business work is vitally important to continue to have a filled pipeline. But the other thing is that, like I said, a big percentage of my time, and I think it's probably more than the average person, is dedicated to research, is dedicated to making sure that I'm finding those people that are qualified, that are potentially likely to buy from me. And I know I have a very good understanding as to, like, because I've worked with so many clients at this point, I have a very strong understanding as to what are the best customers that will benefit from our solution. And then I spend all my time trying to find those customers. And sometimes it's a needle in the haystack, but it's worth it because let's say I could set up a meeting, no problem, with some of these larger companies or what have you. But if there's no real opportunity there, then that's just a waste of time. And I've personally had my fair share of experiences where I end up winning a piece of business. They're a large company. They don't have budget available for us. And then what that ends up happening is that you spend a lot of time and you don't have a lot to show for it. So that is also has a massive impact on your time management, is if you are targeting the right people. Target the right people, you'll have productive meetings that lead to opportunities that lead to sales. Target the wrong people, you'll have opportunities that go nowhere, or even worse, maybe you do close it, but then it's going to end up wasting a ton of your time and you're not going to see any revenue from it. So how you are allocating your time is very important as a top salesperson, to make sure that you're spending your time on what's going to ultimately move the needle towards your quota. And that all goes into strategy and planning.
I read some stuff that you said about scheduling time with executives, CEOs, top people that are tough to get in front of.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about what your approach is and what strategies that you've used really successfully to uh, get time with people that are tough to get time with.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that's a misconception that a lot of salespeople have. I certainly had it myself, where they tend to shy away from reaching out to CEOs because they feel like, oh, they're so busy. And they are busy. But you also have to look at what is their main priority as a CEO. And it is the success of their business. You know, so if you can present yourself as a potential way to improve their business, uh, then they'll feel as if they have a duty to explore it. And even if it doesn't mean them talking to you, if they pass you on to somebody whose job is to buy solutions that you offer, that happens all the time, you know? And so how you prove that to them is doing your research before you reach out. So, pop their company's name into Google, take a look at their LinkedIn page, see what they've been posting about. If they're a public company, take a look at some earnings reports. Uh, have a good understanding as to the industry trends that are impacting everybody, right? Like artificial intelligence. Everybody's trying to figure that out right now. So if you can somehow, if your solution uses it and you see that there's something that they're investing in, then by tying a strategic priority that they have to something that you offer, and then equally important, showing that it delivers results by sharing examples of similar companies that are benefiting from it, then they will feel an obligation. Okay, this is something that I should be exploring, right? Because if my competitors are doing it, then they must have something going for them. And if they don't explore it, then they risk being left behind. And so that's the approach that I take, which is I do my research, I find out what is their strategic priorities. I then identify what our company offers that could help with those strategic priorities. And then I will search for a case study or use case that I can reference and just reach out first thing in the morning. I'll schedule emails to be sent into their inbox at 8 a.m. Or reach out on LinkedIn, what have you. And it will just say something like, hey, I saw that you've been making large investments in artificial intelligence. We utilize artificial intelligence to help streamline processes. It's helped a certain competitor improve their operational efficiencies by 25%. I feel like we could do the same for you. Do you have any time to jump on a call? Uh, and that's a compelling offering, right? If you can somehow increase their operational efficiencies by 20%, that would be massive for their business. Those are the type of things they care about. Not every employee is going to care about things like financial metrics. So you have to make sure that when you're reaching out to people, you're personalizing the value based on what they care about and what they're responsible for.
Absolutely. Well, a few quick questions, quick answers. First, what have you seen as the biggest difference between selling to big companies versus small companies? What do you change? How do you shift?
Yeah, buying committee is, I would say, the biggest difference. Large companies tend to have more decision makers. They tend to require more steps in the sales cycle. It tends to take longer. They have people like finance and procurement that maybe you might not deal with as much with smaller companies. You may have one person, if it's a company of 20 people, that has the ability to make that decision. Whereas with a larger company, it's a much more, you have to navigate a lot more people. Also, you may be more likely to deal with someone who is a C-level executive at a smaller company because they are making those decisions on behalf of their company, as opposed to a large company when they focus more on like high level at the C-level, level, whereas they have people that have more titles like VP that are dealing with, depending on what your solution is, that may be more likely to be the champion that will end up buying from you.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen new sellers make in sales meetings?
Yeah, and this is something that I mentioned earlier. I was kind of thinking about this example when I was speaking, which is I did the same thing. Going into a meeting, not doing a ton of research, and just start presenting slides about your company. A few months ago, we reached out to a rep looking to find out about a specific service, and it was laid out. This is what we want to talk about. The new rep gets on the phone and starts giving our company history and starts telling us about all the awards that they've won and all the different services, which had nothing to do with what we reached out about. By the end of the meeting, we didn't even talk about what we asked to talk about. So, presenting a presentation without first understanding what the customer actually wants to talk about, what they care about.
And what advice would you give someone who's just starting out in B2B sales and would love to follow in your footsteps and become a top producer on the team?
My advice would be to find a mentor, find multiple mentors, reach out to people that you see doing really well at your company. Look at the leaderboard, see who's got the most customers, who's got the most revenue, and then set up time with them and see if they'd be willing to set up a recurring conversation with you. You know, somebody that's outside of maybe your typical manager role, somebody that will tell you how it is, somewhere who most importantly is where you want it to be, and then meet with them and ask them how they did it. Those have been some of the most productive conversations I've had, and I still have them to this day.
And is there a lesson, something that's kind of in your mind that jumps out that you've learned over the years that you'd say is the most valuable sales lesson you ever learned?
That's a good question. Um, Most valuable. Oh, this is one that was a. I did not realize this when I first started, which is as a salesperson, you're going to be selling internally just as much as you're going to be selling externally. So you need to put as much emphasis on your internal relationships and your internal communication as you do your external communication. If you work in B2B sales, chances are you're part of a team. So you work with other people, you're going to have to rely on those people. And it's really important that you have strong relationships with them because what's going to happen is you're going to have to at some point go out of process to win a piece of business. And you want those people that are going to have to approve you going out of process to want to do that for you. The other thing is make sure you understand the go-to contacts internally. That's one of the things that could take a while and can have a really detrimental impact on your time management. If you don't know where to go, then you send yourself up to run all over the place to every time you need to ask a legal question or you need to find something from marketing or finance. Make that a priority to do when you first start, is to know who all the internal contacts are to go with and where do you go, and when. So understanding your sales cycle, understanding all the steps in the sales cycle, and who to go to for what when you come up to them. If you make that a priority up front, you'll save yourself a lot of time later on the road when you actually need them.
So true, especially if you're selling something that's not straightforward, like consulting and that sort of thing. It's so something that's an amorphous product. I think it's you can spend more time, especially at a larger company, dealing internally than externally.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What what would you say? What should all salespeople do every day? What habits should they develop to become more successful?
I love that question because I, you can really break down the success that we all achieve as the accumulation of daily positive habits. So that was another thing that was a learning for me is, you know, you want to have success right away, but that's just not how it works. Your success will come if you put in the work and you do the right things every single day. It will happen. It may take 6 months, it may take 3 months, depending on your industry. But as long as you're consistently doing the right things and you're improving, that success will happen. So one of the things that I think is important to do every day is to think about how you can help individual prospects and customers, how you can provide value. I start my day by reading the trades. I'll see what's been going on in my industry so that I can advise my customers if there's anything that they should know. I'll see if there's any research out that could make sense for one of my customers and or a prospect. And I will then use that to either add value to a customer, just to be, a strategic advisor for them, or to move the proposals down the field, right? So when you just reach out and you just checking in, that's pointless. So that's just like an annoying email that you'd be like, if I had something to tell you, I would tell you, right? But if you say, hey, I know we were discussing the CPG vertical. Here are some insights that I found that I think you might find very helpful. Hey, and by the way, do you have any updates on what we spoke about? Now, that shows that you're not just in it for yourself. You're providing value. So that way, if they do, they'll have that appreciation towards you whenever the time may be.
Such great advice. Well, I'm going to attempt to summarize the wisdom you've dropped on us today here for everybody that's driving while they're listening. First step to being a great salesperson is to become an expert in your field, their field, and the stuff that you're selling. Prospecting is all about who you're targeting, so make sure you take the time to really tightly define the right people that you should be targeting and keep iterating on that. You want to target those people that you decide are the right ones on multiple channels and try to catch people where they're the most active and it's tricky to figure out which channel is the right one for someone sometimes. Try varying your timing on when you reach out to people, since some people are more active or less active on certain channels at different times of the day. And people are busy, so don't expect a response in your first 2 emails. On average, it takes 7 touch points with a person to really kind of bring it to an interaction that is more meaningful. In meetings with new prospects, ask questions and let the prospect do most of the talking. Ask for a follow-up meeting at the end of the first meeting to get a confirmation that they're interested in seeing more. It's a good time to bring that up. Time management is super important to being a top seller. You want to make sure you're allocating enough time towards new business and growing your pipeline, and also make sure you're setting aside enough time to research your new opportunities and research your customers and make sure you know everything you need to know to be prepared going into meetings and interactions with those customers. Getting in front of CEOs and executives, the trick is to show them that you can move their business forward, help them with their problems. So do this, back to research. You do this by doing good research, figuring out what their priorities are, figuring out what's important to them and their industry right now, and figure out what they're willing to invest in, what are their top priorities, and share how you've benefited similar companies, because that can really kind of pique their interest in what you're doing and how you help people. Nobody likes to get lapped by their competitors, right? So great to bring that up in conversations. And you want to make sure your conversations and are super personalized. You want to be personalize your communication with your customers. Well, this has all been so helpful, Andrew. Where can listeners read more about your work? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So I think that you just did a really good job summarizing everything. And honestly, like that's like the big thing also that we didn't really talk about, but is sits at the center of all of this, which is being a good listener, actively listening. So if you're not listening when your prospect's talking, and you're going to turn them off. It's super important that you're leaned in, right? Because asking questions is only half the battle. Being able to recite back just like you did is what is required to have an effective sales meeting. So, good job. Um,
Thanks,
and
Coach.
yeah, I always try to give kudos. Like I, I've been buying a lot of stuff lately for my book, and I like admired some of the salespeople that I've been talking to. And I like to call that out because, as one salesperson, it's nice to acknowledge when somebody's doing a good job. And the one common thread is that in all of those meetings, I was the one yapping away and they were just listening. And then you know, once I was done yapping, they said, okay, this is what we can do for you. That's how you sell in 2024.
Yeah,
So how can
you
you,
need to do that, right? Because everyone's needs are slightly different, and so many solutions are customizable. And so,
right.
I mean, a lot of the basic widget sales, if it's that basic, it's already just being sold on Amazon, right? So almost all
Mm-hmm.
of us in professional sales jobs, the thing that by nature the thing that we're doing is complex, so it needs
Right.
to be customized, even
Yeah.
if it's just customizing the concept and it's always the same thing you're giving people. No two people are using the same thing the same way.
Yeah, and so this is what I spend a lot of time writing about in my book, which is the answer to your question, which is how you could read more of my processes, stuff like that. It's you can sign up for the wait list at andrewbarbuto.com/book, andrewbarbuto.com/book. A big part of the book is talking about how the art and science of sales. The science being the numbers game, which we are all familiar with, and then the art, of course, being the human psychology element of it. So, no two sales are the same, but there are common elements within each one of them, and that's what I try to attempt to do with my book, which is create processes of turning the art into a science. What you can do to get a prospect to like you, how you can build confidence, how you can create urgency. These are all things that I weave throughout while also talking about my stories because sales careers are not linear. So I have had a lot of setbacks and I've had a lot of challenges. And I want to make that very clear to anybody who's in sales is it's super hard. Anybody who tells you it's not probably doesn't actively sell. I actually do sell, so I get where you guys are coming from. And so that I also have been, we were talking about this earlier about putting out YouTube videos. Uh, and I'm just getting the hang of it. I'm not very technically savvy when it comes to that. But I have been speaking about a lot of the topics we've been talking about today, including things like competitive analysis, how to build rapport instantly, prospecting. And that can all be found on my YouTube channel at youtube.com slash at andrew.barbuto. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to discuss anybody trying to build up my LinkedIn following. So I try to post regularly, content, articles, etc. And that is linkedin.com/IN Andrew Barbuto.
I'll tell you on the videos, my one of my big lessons there is if you actually put something out into the world that creates value, it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving. Like there are videos that I did 7, 8 years ago that have just been sitting on YouTube, and people just keep watching them, and they'll discover what Badger Maps does, or whatever. They'll find the podcast because of it. Who knows? But they'll it's YouTube is there's billions of videos on it, I'm sure, but people are looking for specific things, and great way to it, as a salesperson, great way to get the special things that out into the world, and create some magnets to catch some business, right?
Right, and even if my half my face is off the camera, hopefully you can still hear my voice and still get value from it. Because that's one of the things I'm like, I've been trying to get things set up here. I don't have a professional setup here, believe it or not. This is all pretty new to me. I had to move
Yeah.
my desk so you don't see all my kitchen in the background. But I'm getting the hang of it. I'm trying to improve every day. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I'll tell you, some of my first ones were pretty rough, honestly. But you see a big difference. If you want a good laugh, you can watch. There are a lot of the training videos I have are all in one list on Amazon, and I think they're in reverse order because the best ones are at the top. But if you want a good laugh, go back to the earliest ones and watch them the other way. Watch me, watch
Or
me
you could
better.
look at it the other way, which is this is what I think about it. Like, yes, it's a good laugh, but look how far you've come. And when I think
Yeah.
back when I first started, I cringe when I think about the meetings that I had. I still can remember the look of my manager's face glaring at me when I was in a meeting just presenting a pitch deck and not asking any questions. Somebody would bring up something, prospect bring something up, and I would just be like, kind of ignore it, right? There's a
Hmm.
learning curve, and no one's
Sure.
good at anything when they first start. But you can continue to improve and get better than everybody else if you continue to invest in get better. And then, that's not a stagnant thing. That's another thing which a lot of salespeople do. They, you get to a certain point and they stop learning, they stop improving. I try to continue to learn from others because I don't know everything, and there's always more to know. So I try to set up as many meetings today with top salespeople as I did when I first started.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the reasons that sales, and in particular field sales, is so hard is it's 20 different skills, and if you screw up any of them, you can blow the deal, right? So it's so many little things, and it's a funny thing about this podcast is we've taken deep dives into so many little things. You're just like, I never would have even thought about how much complexity there is in this one little slice of sales. Marketing is a similar thing where there's a million little things going on. It's so different than a lot of jobs where it's just like, yeah, I'm an expert in this one thing and I do that one thing, and it's because I'm an expert in it and they pay me for it. And it's like, wow, that sounds
Right.
so easy compared to like,
Proactive versus reactive.
yeah,
That was another big thing from proactive versus reactive. No one's going to tell you what to do when you first get into the day. You have to figure it out, which is why
hmm
time management is so important. You're your own boss. You're better off your clients are your boss, and the revenue that you bring in from them. They'll tell you with their wallet if you're doing a good job or not. So that was another thing that was a learning curve. Is like, going from a reactive job like an account manager type of role or a services and support role where you are told what to do to, hey, you're in sales, figure it out. You have a quota, do your best to achieve it. And if you don't, you know,
yeah. Well, the rubber's got to meet the road in somewhere in the world, and there's benefits that it meets the road in sales. Obviously, it's a well compensated career path, and I think it's an exciting and mentally engaging career path. No one's bored,
right.
so those are the good things. But it is, it does mean you have to hit a curveball, and there's a lot to know about a lot of things. Well, hey guys, this
Mm-hmm.
has been a great episode of the Outside Sales Talk. If you work in field sales, you'll love Badger Maps. It's the #1 route planner. Helps you sell 20% more, drive 20% less. You can get a free trial at badgermapping.com today. And if anyone can think of any other sales reps that would benefit from the stuff that we've learned today, definitely take the time to share this with them. And I really appreciate your time today, Andrew. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye.